All right, Elizabeth, thank you. And this is The Hill on NewsNation. Tonight, the First family awaits a major decision. Will the son of the President of the United States be convicted of a federal crime? The Hunter Biden gun trial now in the hands of the jury. Plus, Donald Trump has a new political tip. Don't tax it. So why is the former president now proposing not taxing tips? Mick Mulvaney tells us. Also tonight, the daring rescue in Gaza that saved 4 hostages. The man who says he shot and killed Osama bin Laden tells us how he thinks the elite commando team got out of Gaza alive. Plus, why one of this country's iconic summer getaways has a new worry. It's running out of pot. The complicated laws shutting down deliveries. Why one of the most well-known governors doesn't want his state to blow it with hemp. And why the debate before the Olympic Games is already heating up for Team USA. Come on in, I'm Blake Berman. This is The Hill on NewsNation. And welcome to Washington tonight. This is The Hill on NewsNation. I'm Blake Berman. The fate of Hunter Biden is in the hands of the jury tonight. Hunter Biden's attorneys wrapped their case today, deciding not to put him on the witness stand. That would have subjected him to cross-examination. Now, during closing arguments, the prosecution quoted from Hunter Biden's book to show he was actively using drugs in 2018 when he bought a firearm that year. The defense argued prosecutors could not, quote, fill in the gaps, end quote, about his drug use during the time of purchase. Now, President Biden's son faces 3 felony counts and the possibility of federal incarceration if convicted. The jurors will resume deliberations tomorrow morning. Joining us here on The Hill tonight, host of The Hill Sunday, Chris Steyerwalt, senior fellow as well at the American Enterprise Institute. Lindsey Granger is a NewsNation contributor. Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. And Aaron Perini, a Republican strategist. Hello to you all. Nice to have you all in on this Monday afternoon, evening, on what I'm sure will be a busy news week. Chris, we start with Hunter Biden. Obviously, we don't know what the jury will decide to do and when they will decide it, but you can imagine the potential political consequences here for his father, the President of the United States, the presumptive Democratic nominee for president, who has already said he will not, he contends, pardon his son if it gets to that point.
Well, you know, Hunter Biden is sort of a poor man's Donald Trump. So you have a person who his defense basically says, yeah, he did it. Sure, he did it. But the law's bad. It's unconstitutional. And this isn't fair that they're charging him. And you also have, in this case, a prosecution that wouldn't have been brought if this was not Hunter Biden. And in both cases, both Hunter Biden and Donald Trump, they put themselves in this position. Even if their defenders say, well, this prosecution's unfair, this is unreasonable, they were the ones who put themselves in this situation. The question with Hunter Biden is, how much will this selfishness, this stubborn refusal to enter a plea deal to this charge, how much will this attrit his father's ability to make the case against Donald Trump? We don't know that yet.
And, well, we do know that President Biden has yet to call Trump a convicted felon out on camera. Maybe he'll do it in the debate. We'll see. But that potentially one of the reasons why. All right, come on in. Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor, host on the Law and Crime Network as well. Jesse, Hunter Biden not making it to the witness stand. What do you think the thinking was there, and was it the right call?
Well, I think it's the right call if he knew for a fact 100% that his father wasn't going to pardon him, right? So if he had a private conversation with his father and he knew he was going to be pardoned, of course he'd take the stand. He had nothing to lose. I think that gives us an insight as to maybe that might not happen. Look, he had nothing to gain from this. This is a tough case for the defense. We have to be clear about this. This is a straightforward path for the prosecution to convict Hunter Biden. If they're trying to say that we know that he was an unlawful user of drugs and he was an addict, you look at the text messages, you look at the testimony, you look at the drug residue, it's very easy to suggest that he was a habitual user. They don't have to prove that he was actually using it on the day that he bought the gun,
right,
but that he was actively engaged in it. Now, the defense is raising whatever creative arguments they can, like he did knowingly violate the law, he didn't see himself as an addict. Could that persuade a juror to pause? Maybe. But if you look at really what's presented, there's not much there for them to go with. And I don't really know what he would say on the stand to help his case.
All right. Meanwhile, Jesse, pre-sentencing procedures are underway in former President Donald Trump's New York hush money trial. The verdict, or at least. He did an interview today with a state court probation officer. He did it remotely from his Palm Beach estates there at Mar-a-Lago. Tell me, Jesse, why is this important? What does this mean, if anything, for sentencing? Because that is a month away for Donald Trump.
This is a very standard process in a very unique case, to say the least. There's a pre-sentencing report in many cases before you have sentencing. Okay. And one of the things you have to determine is, what are some of the factors that the defendant is thinking about in terms of this case? What do you want the judge to know? Who is going to be speaking on your behalf? Do you feel remorse for the crime whatsoever? And certain kind of logistics, where are you going to be? If we put you on house arrest, where would it work? And clearly we're dealing with unprecedented territory, because I can't tell you right now, if Donald Trump is sentenced to prison, would it be an actual prison? Would it be house arrest? So these are some of the considerations and that are factored into that report that the judge will use to determine the actual sentence. But like we've talked about before, Blake, It seems very, very unlikely that he would be sentenced to prison in this case.
All right, Jesse Weber, NewsNation legal contributor, host on the Law and Crime Network. Jesse, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks so much, Blake.
All right. Also tonight, new policy, little difference. And let me show you here for a second what has and hasn't changed along the southern border. Sources within Customs and Border Protection tell NewsNation they have not seen a material difference in activity along the southern border since President Biden's executive action went into effect last Wednesday. Now, numbers provided to NewsNation show encounters along the southern border rose to more than 4,000 on the first day of the new order. They dropped, as you can see in the numbers there, slightly thereafter, but they are still solidly above the target range. Now, the executive action allows for most asylum seekers to be turned away at the southern border if the daily average over any 7-day stretch exceeds 2,500. The number would have to drop to 1,500 for a reversal. Before jetting off for his overseas trip, President Biden said, quote, "The border is not a political issue to be weaponized." Donald Trump this weekend suggested that's exactly what's happening.
He could have done this. He's a little late, by the way. It's meaningless what he signed. It's just a PR ploy, as usual.
Now, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas this weekend defended how the Biden administration has handled the border.
Our model worked. We drove the numbers down. They go down. They go up. What we need is congressional action.
Our Ali Bradley just spoke with the head of the U.S. Border Patrol, the first comments that he has made since the policy was put into place, the best in the business along the southern border. Ali Bradley joins us live once again. Ali, I saw some of the interview and the comments, fascinating, great interview. And I guess one of the takeaways is he doesn't think this is going to get it done, essentially.
Yeah, so we just spoke with Border Patrol Chief Jason Owens. He exclusively told us that they are grateful something is being done here, Blake, but the reality is they need those numbers down to 1,500, right? We keep fixating on this 2,500, but he says those numbers need to be even fewer, less than what we're seeing, half of what we're seeing. And so right now, he says the only way that they're going to make any progress here is if the migrants know that they have to go through the ports legally. Take a listen to what he said.
I think it'll have an impact if everybody is able to do their part. I don't see it shutting off anytime soon unless and until it starts to have that impact where the migrants get the message that, hey, if you want to come into this country, you need to come in through a port of entry.
Now, Blake, you talked about those numbers, right? We saw them rise and kind of drop a little bit, but the capacity numbers are a sticking point for me because we've seen them go and exceed over 11,000 for Border Patrol capacity. And a lot of that is because they're having issues removing people. We don't have a lot of countries that play ball with the United States. We know Venezuela hasn't been taking deportation flights back for months. So I asked Chief Owens about that as well. He says they are working with these other countries to try to figure out how to deport some of these people that they're just not able to. And that also includes conversations with Mexico about them doing their part, maybe taking more individuals back into Mexico and helping out that way, Blake.
Ali Bradley, live for us with a great interview along the southern border. Ali, thank you. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon. All right, Julia. So here's what caught my attention from that. Quote, "I don't see it shutting off anytime soon." Does that mean this was just a headline, an event, get it out there, try to take it off the table for the president and move on, if that's what they're saying down there at Border Patrol?
Look, the president had to do something, some sort of executive action, and we saw a lot of, I think, speculation as to, in terms of when he was going to do this. Politically, this isn't a great issue for him. We know that he isn't polling well with it. Democrats would say that, look, we need to give this some more time. The problem is, obviously time is of the essence if you're looking at the people flowing over the southern border, but also time is of the essence for the president. If you look at it from a political perspective, we are in June. The election is in November. So if there aren't changes coming anytime soon, that's going to be difficult for Biden.
I saw you nodding your head during most, if not all, of Allie's report. What caught your attention there?
I think there are a couple of things that caught my attention. One, to your point about Democrats saying we need to do something, they're messaging right now with Mayorkas out there right now saying our model worked. We drove the numbers down. They are owning more and more of the catastrophe at the southern border the more they put themselves out there like this. And another thing about shutting down with the EO and who's entering at ports of entry or other places, there's reporting today that in San Diego, Border Patrol put out a memo internally to their people to say, you got to keep releasing folks at this point. There is a clear breakdown in the EO being implemented, and we're still seeing thousands of people enter the United States. So the timing is of the essence for Joe Biden, but he's so far behind the eight ball in this that it's not going to move the polling fast enough.
Lindsay, how can you sit there and defend what Alejandro Mayorkas said? Which is basically, it worked. Our model works. Everything's good.
I think we looked at Friday and they saw the numbers drop a little bit and then they went back to regular like your poll showed. But I think it's important to understand that we need a complete overhaul of the asylum program. And so that relies on Congress, not an executive order. That will never fix this. And I think what Biden did is put something forward, which is important because we need to take a step. This is the pinch point in his campaign for the entire election, similarly to how reproductive rights is the pinch point in the Republican campaign going into November. And so I think that everyone understands that this is a problem. I live in Denver, Colorado, which is a purple state on this issue, right? There's a lot of friction there. Our mayor has allowed the most migrants in per capita. So it is a political issue.
So how do you say, look, this is an issue for Democrats while also squaring with what Mayorkas said? Because he's doubling and tripling down on the policy. Don't you say, look, we made mistakes at the beginning, and here's how we're fixing it. Is that a better message or no?
Oh, Biden has made an exact U-turn, which is kind of ridiculous when you think how he came in the beginning and said, listen, I'm going to absolutely deter away from anything that President Trump did. And now this executive order is almost exactly what he wanted to do years ago. So definitely you have to own up to it. But I think a lot of this political strife that you talked about leading into this segment with his son being on trial and everything else that comes with it, maybe staying more away from this and even staying away from Donald Trump's conviction. He's trying to lean into some other things that he's doing well, like maybe the economic numbers that came out recently as opposed to this.
So you, Chris, had talked about time and again, Joe Biden was going to do something.
Yes.
And he did it. I just heard the Border Patrol chief tell Allie, I don't see it shutting off anytime soon. If he's right. Let's just take him at his word.
Okay.
Okay, he's the expert. He's right. If he's right, do you think the president will do more? And if so, when might he do more?
All right, you saw the European Parliament elections.
Oh, yes.
This phone that we carry around has revolutionized the way the world works. The migrants who are coming into the United States, just as the migrants who have flowed into Western Europe and Central Europe, use their phones to communicate, to find their way across the burning deserts, to make contact with communities of like origin in the countries where they're going. They're also following the news. They're also keeping track of what's going on. The way that Biden suffers here, the way that Democrats suffer here is, if you think Trump may win the election, so let's say you live in one of the Central American nations or Northern South America, and you say, when am I going to go to the United States? I'm desperate to go to the United States. When am I going to go? You better not wait, because if the orange one returns, then they'll be locking kids in cages and doing all of that stuff at the border that they read about on their phones and communicated about with their families. So Biden faces this problem of the closer you get to the election, the more likely there is going to be pressure at the southern border, and that's just tough.
And I think migration trends normally tick up later in the year. When's the election, of course.
But if Biden wins again, it might be another leniency point for them to say, well, if he wins, I should come at that time.
They should be tracking NewsNation. They should be following Susan Desmond.
They need Star Wars break it down. Gotta watch and see how the polling is.
Break it down all throughout. All right, still to come here on the Hill over the next 45 minutes or so. What was it like for the Israeli military to rescue 4 hostages held by Hamas in broad daylight? Coming up, I'll talk with the SEAL Team 6 member, Rob O'Neill, who was on that daring raid that killed Osama bin Laden. We'll get his perspective, ask him what he thinks it was like. Plus, what about the idea of no longer taxing tips? Donald Trump now floating that possibility. His former chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, joins us to explain what that's all about. But first, on the other side of the break, Steyerwalt is going to break down split ticket voting. There's an interesting dynamic here. You're a Democratic senator. Good thing happening, I guess you could say. If you're hoping Joe Biden wins the presidency and you're a Democrat, got to watch some of these numbers, right?
Well, I would just say we live in a very boring political time, and that everything is so well sorted on a partisan basis. But this election, there are some indications that we could get some fun and interesting weirdness. There could be some marshmallows in our Lucky Charms, so maybe it'll be interesting. Maybe it'll be fun.
Breaking down the fun and interesting weirdness. Other side of the break, you're watching The Hill. All right, welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. So with President Biden trailing Donald Trump in the key battleground states, some Democratic Senate candidates in tough races are seeing themselves actually outpace the top of the ticket. That means we could potentially see a resurgence here of what's known as split ticket voting. So what is it? Why is it important? Steyerwalt here to break it all down.
I have to tell you why it's important, too. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm up to that. It's summer already. Okay, so it's not uncommon for a Senate candidate or a gubernatorial candidate to outpace the presidential nominee of their party in a given state. We know that, right? Donald Trump underperformed a ton of Republican Senate candidates in both 2016 and 2020. This is not unusual. What is unusual is if the Senate candidate and the presidential candidate actually go 2 different ways. Now, in the long history of split ticket voting in these United States, it was very common about 1968 to about 1988. And since then, it went down and down and down and down. But here's an article that you should look at. It's in The Hill. It's in that Hill that you can read. Senate Democrats outperforming Biden raises possibility of historic split ticket voting. Now, you know I'm skeptical whenever anybody calls something historic or unprecedented because I'm crabby like that. So we're going to take a deeper look. So here's the map of the 2020 Senate races. Here's how it went in 2020. Why does Maine have a golden border around it? Is it because we love the Pine Tree State? Sure, we do. But it's because every other Senate race aligned exactly with the presidential preference at the top of the ticket, except for Susan Collins, who won in Maine, despite the fact that Donald Trump lost by a substantial margin in Maine. So from a time when there used to be more than a dozen splits between the Senate and the presidency, by 2020, we were down to only one, just that one. How's it going this time? Great question. I'm glad you asked. Take a look at See Here. This is how the Senate candidates in these races, in an average of recent polling with our partners at Decision Desk HQ, or sometimes at 538, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to emphasize the DDHQ part. And you see there the performance of these Senate candidates in the polls versus Biden. And in every case, they're outperforming Biden. In Ohio, Sherrod Brown is way ahead of Biden's performance. And look, by the end, a lot of this is going to true up. Right? These numbers will come into alignment typically by the time we get to the end. But I would say that given what the Senate map is, and given how poorly Biden is running in some of these states and how this is all working, the possibility for a little rebirth in split ticket voting, which, by the way, is good for the country. I would just say it's good for the country because weird coalitions actually lead to progress. They don't impede progress. They don't impede action. They actually lead to action. Could be good. So we'll keep track of it, and it'll be good. It'll be interesting.
Steyerwalt breaks it down.
I did it.
You did it.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there should be a dance of some kind that comes with this.
That's after. That's what I do on my own time, Aaron, is my own dance.
As someone who runs races, what'd you see there?
I think there are a couple of things you see there. One, the American people, and specifically in these states, they're blaming Joe Biden for what they're unhappy with right now. When they are asked who they're going to vote for, they're saying not him. Two, I think it means that those Senate Democrat candidates are actually pretty well liked in their states. That people are like, okay, I can see the difference between Biden's failure and where Democrats are in the Senate. And I think for the third point, that this also leads to the perpetual base problem that Joe Biden's looking at. Democrats are lining up behind Democrats in these Senate races. That's more of a base play it is right now. Joe Biden still hasn't shored up, I think, the Democratic base enough where he isn't continuing to see those uncommitted voters. And right now, Democrats are the ones rejecting Joe Biden.
You cover these races. You talk to these folks.
Yeah. I actually have a question for Chris. I mean, I'm curious because we talk about the presidential level, the gubernatorial level, and the Senate level. But in a state like Pennsylvania, there are there's a handful of swing House districts. How do they play into this? Because we know that House districts tend to be can be more homogeneous. Some are more, swingy. How are they factoring into this ticket splitting? The
beauty of the American voter is that he or she doesn't really know or care who their member of Congress is, unless they're unless it's a state where you have one member of Congress or two. But in a state like Pennsylvania, I don't think you'd get a great success rate if you were to survey the median voter and say, name your congressperson right now. A lot of them probably don't know or can't remember. That's why the House result in the end will track pretty closely to what the presidential result is. Now, the Republicans have a built-in advantage when it comes to the House because they're the rural party. When Democrats were the rural party, they had an advantage built in the House because when you have these states that have one at-large member and all of that stuff. So the House will track with the presidency, and either way, it's going to be a 5-seat majority one way or the other.
All right, there's still much more ahead here on the Hill. Hot Mic with Mick on the other side of the break. Mulvaney joins us. Hello, Mick. Is he out there? There you are. Mick.
Octopus.
Oh, yeah, on the plate behind him. Former budget director, Trump White House chief of staff. I'm wondering what you make of this whole tax plan that Trump floated about not taxing tips. That caught you by surprise?
A little bit. Clearly Starwell has just broken things down, so I'm going to fix that when we get back with the Hot Mic segment.
Mulvaney, other side of the break. You're watching The Hill. Welcome back here to The Hill on NewsNation. So Donald Trump unveiling a new campaign promise in the state of Nevada over the weekend, where roughly 1 in 4 private sector voters are employed in the hospitality industry. The former president saying, quote, for those hotel workers and people that get tips, you're going to be very happy because when I get into office, we are not going to charge taxes on tips. So let me explain how that could work and what it might mean. First off, Congress is the one who writes and passes tax policy, which originates in the House Ways and Means Committee. It's the process Trump and Republicans used in 2017 when they overhauled the tax code, perhaps Trump's single biggest legislative achievement. Now, according to the Tax Foundation, in 2018, which are the latest figures, there was roughly $38 billion of taxable tip income. That would likely mean billions in tax payments could be wiped away. It's also just a fraction, for example, of one of President Biden's priorities, which is wiping away student debt. For example, the president's student loan forgiveness program means roughly 4.75 million Americans, or more than 1 in every 10 student loan borrowers, have had some or all of their student loans forgiven. $167 billion in total. The president has done that unilaterally. Come on in, Mick Mulvaney, as it's time for Hot Mic with Mick. The former congressman, budget director, White House chief of staff, tells us what he's hearing, what he's thinking. All right, Mulvaney, so I saw this from Donald Trump over the weekend. I said, wait a minute. This campaign promise is essentially the same thing that President Biden has done with student loan forgiveness. It's picking winners and losers. For Biden, it was student loans, and Trump is rolling out the idea of tips. How did this start, and why is he doing it?
And I'm trying to find out from the campaign if this was part of an orchestrated sort of theme or if it's just something he made up on the stump. But either way, it didn't surprise me, and here's why. And I've had these conversations with the president dozens of times in the Oval Office during the first re-election in 2020, which is that he's always believed that Democrats can buy votes. He's always said, oh, it's tough to beat somebody who gives stuff away. And he talked about, I think at the time it was Bernie Sanders, who was talking about giveaways by the Democrats, including student loan forgiveness. And Trump was always like, well, you can't beat somebody who's giving stuff away. And I kept reminding him, yes, you can. If that was the Democrats' sort of formula for victory, then no Republican would ever win. But we win again and again. And usually the Democrats, or the small government Democrats, are the ones who are winning, Bill Clinton most notably. So this has been in his DNA. This was his way to sort of go after the Democrats on their own turf. Go, Joe Biden, you're giving your student loan. I will meet you and I will raise you and I will not tax tips. I'm not sure how it works. As you mentioned, it's not that much money compared to what the student loans
is.
It's fractional. But it doesn't surprise me because it's consistent with what he's concerned about in running against a Democrat.
Okay. All right. Now the latest from our partners, Mick, at Decision Desk HQ on their presidential election forecast and the impacts of Donald Trump's guilty verdict. Now, Trump's chance of winning against President Biden stands the exact same today as on May 30th, when the verdict was announced, with Trump at 56% probability of winning, Biden at 44%. The polling hasn't changed much either, Mick, as the numbers are all seemingly margin of error type stuff. What do you make of it, Mick, that there hasn't been some sort of a seismic shift post-guilty verdict?
Yeah, and the Democrats have tried to put out some polls today saying that, there's a small lead for Biden. But you're right. It's not much change from before the conviction. Here's what I think is happening. I'd be curious to get Steyerwalt's take on this. One of two things or both. First of all, people have already made up their minds about Donald Trump anyway, and the conviction didn't change their mind one way or the other. And or maybe there is a small group of people, to use a broad brush, a suburban white housewife in the Midwest who's just decided, you know what, I'd like the policies. I can't vote for him as a convicted felon. But for every one of those, is there another voter that has come to Donald Trump, a minority voter who says, you know what, now maybe he understands why I don't trust the government like I don't. Maybe he can understand me and empathize with me in ways that Democrats can't. So maybe there were some changes, but the net is very, very marginal. I don't think you're going to see these polls move much before the first debate.
He name-checked you. I'll get to you in a second. But does it concern? I mean, there hasn't been anything like massive.
Right. I think to not see any change is disturbing. We know that we've seen civil trials, we've seen criminal trials now. He's actually, the words convicted felon is a real thing. And so it's nothing to celebrate that somebody on our ballot is going to be a convicted felon and then appeal that all the way up to Election Day. It's also nothing to celebrate that we're looking at everything going on with Biden and how apathetic voters are when he mentions people of color maybe switching parties. It's not simply because of what Trump is doing. It's because of being apathetic towards Biden. And so I think that that's really the biggest problem here. But we also cannot pretend like this is normal. This is not a normal thing happening, that we're watching somebody go through all these trials and have several ones coming down the pike. And even though he's finding little holes in the cases, like to pick out Fani Willis and different things coming up, it's still the actions that you did. As Chris pointed out, these people committed the actions. And so allegedly, and we're going to go through the trials, but there's that much smoke, there's tons of fire. I pointed this out in 2022 over and over again on The View. If you keep prosecuting President Trump over and over again, from the January 6th committee all the way to the civil trials to the criminal trials, now people are exhausted. And so that's probably why you're seeing voters tune out of this, because it's been like 2 years plus of constantly talking about having him on trial.
Your response to Mick would be?
There has not been one worthwhile poll that has been conducted since the verdict. Not one. There has not been one, and this is something I complain about all the time. But high-quality polling is expensive and hard to do, and what is filling up these averages is often a lot of junk. I agree with the premise that 85-90% of the vote in the United States is already banked. Nothing. Donald Trump could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and Republicans would find a way to say, well, but the taxes, but the whatever, and they would rationalize their way into it. And Joe Biden could be in an iron lung, and Democrats would say, but it's worth it because we've got to stop Trump. It's the battle for those 5 or 6% there in the middle who are genuinely up for grabs.
All right, Mick, let's end Hot Mic with Mick this way. Your home state, South Carolina, Nancy Mace, Congresswoman. She's fairly well known. She's got a primary. What's going to happen?
It's going to be really, really tight. A fascinating race. And one of the races, even though it's in South Carolina, so I'm biased, is drawing together all these sorts of intra-Republican dynamics. You've got Donald Trump, who was against Nancy Mace 4 years ago and 2 years ago, now with Nancy Mace. You have Kevin McCarthy against Nancy Mace. You have Nancy Mace's former chief of staff who filed to run against her and then pulled out of the race. And you've got a legitimate candidate running against her. Tomorrow night, by the time the show's on, we should know more about this race. But this one is going to be one of the more interesting races to watch tomorrow.
We'll leave it there, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Mick Mulvaney, thank you, sir. That was Hot Mic with Mick. Catch you then.
Thanks, Blake.
Yep, of course. Meantime, a programming note here. RFK Jr. joins Dan Abrams live tonight to talk about his presidential campaign efforts to get onto the debate stage. That is 9 o'clock Eastern right here on NewsNation. But before then, and coming up, a daring and deadly mission to rescue hostages held by Hamas. Israeli soldiers going in the middle of the day to save the lives of 4 people. So what must that have been like to go on that mission? Rob O'Neill, member of SEAL Team 6, the man who says he shot and killed Osama bin Laden, joins us on the other side of the break. You're watching The Hill.
Special guest Bill O'Reilly on Cuomo.
I know a lot, Cuomo, and you'd be very wise to listen very closely.
Toe to toe and TV's liveliest, most honest debate.
Can't wait till the next time I see you.
Wednesday at 8, 7 Central, only on NewsNation.
In the Israel-Hamas war, the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken met today with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to discuss a possible ceasefire, and the UN Security Council passing a ceasefire proposal drafted by the U.S., but it's not clear if either Israel or Hamas will accept the terms. It comes after the Israel Defense Forces rescued 4 hostages held in Gaza and kidnapped on October 7th. The hostages were held in a crowded civilian area, and the Gaza Health Ministry says more than 270 Palestinians, they claim, were killed during the rescue. In a report by the Wall Street Journal, an Israeli military official called the operation, quote, a thin line between huge success and huge failure. Joining us now is the former Navy SEAL, Robert O'Neill. You might know him. He was a part of SEAL Team 6, which successfully completed the 2011 killing of Osama bin Laden. Rob, nice to speak with you. Great to have you here on the Hill. This, by all accounts, was a daring rescue to get hostages, as we all know, to get hostages back. And I wonder, with your expertise, what you think that operation was like, and I wonder sort of what went through your mind when you first woke up, saw the news.
Thanks for having me, Blake. My first thought was how daring it was to go into Gaza in the middle of the day. They did that for obvious reasons. The terrorists would think they would come at night because of night vision and lasers, but they gave them a little mud suck there, and they came in about 11 in the afternoon. And it's awesome that they pulled it off. They did have one casualty on the Israeli side, unfortunately, but you got to figure a hostage rescue is dangerous enough when you're not trying to rescue hostages for people that want to martyr themselves. So you're dealing with anything from improvised explosive device on the walls to suicide vests to guys that are going to barricade and shoot. And you got to get in there fast, because if you don't get the hostages quick, once they know you're there, they're going to kill the hostages. Very, very dangerous situation. And the easy part's getting in, the hard part's getting out, which they found out. They simultaneously hit 2 buildings, but on the way out, the whole town's coming down on anyone who's got a gun, a PK, an AK. They're gonna be shooting at them. So it was a long afternoon, but very well done.
When you say the hard part is getting out, can you explain yourself? Why is that?
Because once you're in there, they know you're there, and I don't care how many innocent civilians they say there are. There's a ton of Hamas in there too. And once they're awakened to Israelis being in there, especially trying to rescue their prized possession, the hostages, they're all going to come out and shoot. And they're in an area we call a military operations urban terrain, or MOUNT, which means you can get shot at from anywhere: basements, rooftops, out of spider holes or windows, and everyone's shooting at you. And you can't just go in as the good guys. You can't just go in there and spray everywhere. So you got to try to find a way out, whether it's bounding. If a vehicle goes down, then you got to secure the vehicle, get the survivors, get the others out, and you got to make it to the beach to get to the helicopters. There's so many moving parts on the way out with like 4 different units. There's a lot going on, a lot of communication.
The former spokesperson, a former spokesperson for Israel, was asked about this idea of maybe there should have been some notice beforehand. I want to play the question that was asked, his response, get your reaction on the other side.
Would there have been a warning to those civilians for them to get out on time?
For sure, of course, we cannot anticipate Israel to be warning ahead of a raid to extract or to save hostages, because then what the terrorists would do is to kill the hostages, and that would defeat the purpose.
Is there any way you can warn in advance of this? I mean, no, right? Because you're going in for hostages.
When we were getting ready to go on the bin Laden raid, there was the chance, they said we could go multilateral with Pakistan. You tell the Pakistanis you're coming, bin Laden's gone. You tell the Palestinians you're coming, the hostages are dead or they're not going to be there. I mean, that is just, there's someone asking a question who doesn't know the difference. I don't even want to say it on the air. That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. If I had someone in my unit suggest we tell the terrorists we're going to come in, they're fired. I'm firing everyone that suggests it.
Right. What do you make of the pushback? Because there's been obvious pushback, Rob, about the reported amounts of casualties and the reported amount, reportedly, of deaths. Obviously, it was a massive scene there. And what would you say to the folks who might say, Rob, there were, people who died on the other side on this rescue, and maybe, maybe the forces went too far in their view. What would you tell them?
Well, they should start with Hamas, because Hamas's tactics are to put everything they have behind civilians. They put their headquarters below hospitals and schools. They put hostages in with civilians, and then they hide behind them. Hamas is the problem here, and that's it. I've been to war a lot. I don't like war, and I hate when innocent people get killed. It breaks my heart. But over 90% of Palestinians voted for Hamas, and they're terrorists. So unfortunately, sometimes you reap what you sow.
There are more hostages, and whenever we talk about this story, Rob, I make sure to let people know there are more hostages. And among the hostages are Americans. And I wonder now that this operation, and I'll leave you with this question. I wonder now that this operation has been completed and successfully completed in getting the 4 back, how much harder, or maybe it doesn't, I don't know, but how much harder it might make future operations and what those might be like.
I think it might make the intelligence a little bit harder just because they'll be looking out for it. But, if anything, hopefully they can negotiate them out. I mean, I don't have a problem with negotiating reasonably to get the hostages back. We might do it unilaterally just to get the 5 Americans back, because there are 5 Americans potentially still there in the bodies of 3 more. Again, and we're not going to tell them we're going to come. For all we know, we got American boots on the ground. Delta Force might hit someone tomorrow. We don't know. So, I don't think it takes anything off the table.
All right. Rob O'Neill, former SEAL Team 6, the man who says he killed Osama bin Laden, was on that raid. I've followed you for quite some time, and I really appreciate you coming on, Rob O'Neill. Hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you, sir. Yep. All right, still to come here from the Hill on NewsNation, why one of the most well-known governors doesn't want his state to blow it with hemp, and why the debate before the Olympic Games is already heating up for Team USA. We are back in a few here on the Hill. Stay with us.
To reach adulthood. That's why vaccines matter so much. For 40 years, Rotary and partners have delivered vaccines globally. Like here and even here, in your neighborhood and around the world, Rotary is ensuring children grow up safe from preventable diseases.
Hi, I'm Gary LaVox. One thing you know about me is I used to be the lead singer of Rascal Flatts. But what you might not know is I now use my voice to support paralyzed veterans of America. Did you know buses and trains are accessible, but airplanes aren't? It is why I support PVA. Today, PVA is fighting for accessible air travel, a basic civil right for our nation's disabled veterans and all people with disabilities. Our nation's heroes fought for your independence. So join me in the fight for theirs at PVA.org.
We tend not to think about right now, but right now in front of us is victory over cancer. Right now, cancer research funded by the V Foundation is leading to better treatments and saving lives. When you give to the V Foundation, 100% of your donation goes directly to game-changing cancer research. Victory over cancer is there for the taking. By you. Donate at V.org. Because today's cancer research is tomorrow's victory.
Don't give up. Don't ever give up.
All right, welcome back here to the Hill on NewsNation. So Martha's Vineyard is a well-known, iconic summer vacation spot, an island off the coast of Massachusetts. Some of the most well-known people, lots of celebrities, have homes there. But Martha's Vineyard also has a big problem, apparently. The island is running out of marijuana. The state's Cannabis Commission doesn't want to violate federal laws by transporting marijuana across the ocean by boat or by plane. Now, supplies are expected to run out by September, affecting, and this is the important part here, hundreds of medical users, along with, as well, thousands of recreational users. The commission is currently trying to find a solution after a resident filed a lawsuit. Maritime laws are no joke. Meantime, in the state of Florida, the governor, Ron DeSantis, just vetoed a bill to restrict the sale of intoxicating hemp products in the Sunshine State. The governor says the goals of the legislation are commendable, but he says, quote, the bill would, in fact, impose debilitating regulatory burdens on small businesses and almost certainly fail to achieve its purposes, end quote. Hemp products are legal in Florida with some restrictions, but recreational pot is not, and will be voted on this upcoming November. You know the governor well. He ran for president, I remember. That was a thing. You worked to try to help elect him. What do you make? What's he doing there in the state of Florida with this?
I think this is Governor DeSantis having a pulse on what the people want in the state of Florida. You see that there's going to be voting in November when it comes to the larger pot issue. But this is a guy who understands his state. And when he cites the small business regulations as well, this is one of the many reasons why he's one of the most popular governors in the country, is because he steps in and does stuff like this.
It's because he's got the pulse?
Yeah, that's true. And I think just looking at ballot measures in Florida, the state does, and we said this last week, it interestingly has this history of electing conservatives or Republicans, at least in recent history, but voting for more left-leaning ballot measures like minimum wage, medical marijuana, that kind of thing.
Right. You think this drives turnout? I mean, this is going to drive turnout in Florida, I would think, right?
I feel like it's tiptoeing the line. Like, you can have this type of hemp, but not
that type.
Right. It's like, I kind of don't even understand what's happening here. It's kind of like being forward-thinking.
You don't understand what's happening in the state of Florida? Is that what you're telling me?
No, Florida man.
But no, this is not that. This is not weed. This is different kind. This is for making rope and making clothes and making. Do you know what people on Martha's Vineyard probably carry their legal cannabis in when they go down to the beach? Probably a hemp bag. They'll probably use a hemp bag to put their CBD oil on their elbow.
You should be the spokesperson for him right now.
I'm here for hemp bags.
By the way, speaking of having the pulse, does USA basketball have the pulse? Because the Olympic team has decided to leave Caitlin Clark off the squad for the 2024 Paris Olympics. It's causing a bit of controversy, but the basketball superstar is showing professionalism about the decision.
I'm excited for them. I'm going to be rooting them on to win gold. Honestly, no disappointment. I think it just gives you something to work for. That's a dream. Hopefully one day I can be there, and I think it's just a little more motivation.
She is reportedly at the top of the list of potential alternates in case a replacement is needed. This is silly, is it not? She is the star that is growing the game. They're going to win. Why not put her on as the last person on the roster, just like the Dream Team did in 1992 with Christian Laettner?
They were with veterans, though. It's okay. Caitlin Clark is a really good college player, right? And so she made waves, but they're not into the feel-good thing.
She's growing the sport nonstop.
She's growing the sport, but the Olympics goal is to get the gold, not to try to make people feel good because this girl's so popular. And so that's kind of okay, she's going to be there in the next 4 years. We all know that. She's going to change the sport in the next 4 years. Why is it such a controversy? Why can't we be more mad than her?
Will they win?
I think so.
I mean, I don't know.
They haven't lost in forever.
Right. I don't think that any basketball has lost from the U.S.
As long as they don't lose.
And the veterans deserve, I think, to get some kind of shot.
Yeah, you know what? Ultimately, I think Caitlin Clark could not be doing better work for Caitlin Clark than she is. The way she handled that, the poise and demeanor that young lady shows is a role model for every young lady in this country. She stood there when there are all those cameras in her face, and she said, you know what? It's more motivation. Love to see it. Let's go.
We did a segment on this show, I don't know, a month or two ago about Caitlin Clark, where we said politicians could learn.
Yes, I remember that segment.
Caitlin Clark. All right, speaking of sports, by the way, today's game 2 of the Stanley Cup Finals, Florida Panthers, Edmonton Oilers. Why am I talking about it? It's being played down the road. It's being played in Sunrise, Florida, down the road from Lauderhill. So we leave the show from our hill to yours.